Thank you so much, Paul, and welcome to all the participants and our esteemed panelists. I would like to extend a warm virtual welcome to this insightful panel discussion, African Perspectives on Empowering Student Learning Through AI. In our interconnected world, it's a privilege to gather here today, transcending geographical boundaries, delve into the exciting intersection of education and artificial intelligence from a perspective of Africa. I'm your moderator today, Kaliisa from the University of Oslo, assisted by Professor Paul Prinsloo from the University of South Africa. We find it a great pleasure to guide our dialogue and bring together an esteemed group of experts who represent a range of experiences and insights from across the African continent. We are here to explore, discuss, and learn from their diverse perspectives on the potential and the challenges of AI in education within the African context. So in the next 1 hour, we will navigate a carefully structured conversation examining the opportunities and the unique challenges that AI represents to empower learners in Africa. From equitable access to cultural considerations, transforming the teacher-student dynamic, and addressing ethical concerns, we will cover an array of vital topics. And as we look in the future, the insights shared here today will play a pivotal role in shaping the direction of AI-driven education on the African continent and indeed the world. Your participation and questions are highly welcome from the audience, and they will further enrich our dialogue. So without further ado, let's embark on this enlightening discussion with a brief introduction from our panelists. Today we have 5 panelists, Tumaini Kabudi, postdoctoral researcher, Oslo University, Maha Bali from the American University in Cairo, Victor Odumuyiwa, senior lecturer, University of Laos, Nigeria, Katleho, PhD candidate, University of Pretoria, and Elizabeth Ake, Director of Institutional Research, University of the Western Africa. So with a brief introduction from each panelist, I will ask Tumaini to start with a brief introduction, highlighting your expertise and interests and perspectives on AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Rogers. I believe you can hear me, right? Good. So as you said, my name is Tumaini Kabudi. I'm a postdoc at the University of Oslo in Oslo Artificial Intelligence Lab. But yes, so in terms of like AI and education, I started my research first with technology enhanced learning environments, the use of it, the application of technology in African education institutions, specifically in my country, Tanzania. Later on, I evolved to look into the more contemporary learning environments, and that is the adaptive learning systems. And with the adaptive learning systems, I looked how to design this system from a socio-technical standpoint. And what I mean by that is to not only look at the technical aspects of designing these systems, but also the social aspects of this. So the social aspects involves of like in terms of involving the users, which are the teachers and the students, how they interact with the systems. So from that, I have a keen research interest with AI in education, adaptive learning systems, technology enhanced learning environments, but also now in my postdoc, I look into AI trustworthiness and sustainability. So I am very glad to be part of this panel discussion to contribute my perspectives in this topic. Thank you.
Interesting. That's really very good, and very happy to hear about the social technical perspectives of AI systems or technology design, which I think is really very key. Next, we'll go to Maha.
Maha is not yet in the room, Roger, so I suggest you move on.
Then we go to Victor. Is Victor here? Not yet. Okay, I think Katleho next.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Katleho Mokoena. I am a PhD student at the University of Pretoria. My background in academia is theology. And I am pursuing my research on Ubuntu ethics and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. Now, I'm researching AI from an African theology and an African philosophy perspective. So it's more human science than technical aspects of it, but looking at the human science behind it. And also I'm looking at, especially within the African context, the ethical implications of AI in the African context, and also making use of African perspectives, such as Ubuntu philosophy, in order to address the concerns that AI brings on an ethical level. So yeah, I have been involved in research with NGOs and private companies in regards to AI and data policy. Yeah, and I'm also still learning as well. There's a lot to learn, and I'm glad to be part of sessions that allow me and give me the platform to share my experiences, but also to learn from others as well. Thank you.
Very interesting. And I mean, I'm really looking forward to learning about the Ubuntu ethics and in emerging technologies. I think that's a very good perspective to take from an African perspective and talking about all how cultural implications could actually impact the design and the use of technology systems and AI in particular. So we'll get back to that, I think, in a minute. But we'll hear from Elizabeth now.
Yes, I'm Professor Liz Archer. I'm from the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, and I'm the Director for Institutional Research there. The work that I do is very wide-ranging. It's strategy, planning, business intelligence, and institutional research. And I work all the way from lecturers up to governmental stakeholders. I've always been a bit of a techie and a geek. People laugh at me about that, but it stood me in well here when we talk about artificial intelligence. When we talk about artificial intelligence, just a little bit of a direction where I stand. It's not really a matter about if or even when, because it's already now, but it is happening, and how are we going to play a role in using AI to reshape our world? So AI is an absolute tide that is hitting us at the moment. And personally, I'm choosing not to be just some driftwood, but to surf this wave and seeing how AI can make us more creative, more productive, and useful while acknowledging the challenges. So I'm looking forward. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And I think we have a very well diverse kind of panel from people looking at design of technology systems and to institutional research and business intelligence to Ubuntu ethics in emerging technologies. I think this is going to be interesting. I think there are some panelists who are still having issues to get in, but when they get in, they'll get the time to introduce themselves and then we proceed. So now getting into the discussion, I would like us to first start with understanding the landscape of AI technologies within the African context. And I would like to invite Tumaini to kind of give a highlight to like what are the current educational challenges and opportunities that AI integration into education or in various African regions. What could be the issues? What could be the opportunities? What can we look forward, but also what could be the challenges in integrating this kind of technology within the African context?
Yeah, so before I start speaking on the opportunities and challenges, I just want for all of us to understand or to have a common understanding today what artificial intelligence is. And artificial intelligence, there's a lot of definitions, but I would define it as the intelligence of a machine or computer programs that enables it to mimic or imitate human capabilities. So I want to emphasize on the word imitate and mimic. So it's the ability to think and act like a human, and that is the ability to acquire the knowledge, the ability to recognize the different patterns in data, and also analyzing the problem to apply on various tasks and involving it. Another thing that I want to highlight before too is that I think most of the general public have been introduced to artificial intelligence due to now to ChatGPT. But the use of artificial intelligence in education is dating back to the 1950s when we had the Skinner teaching machine being devised in America. And this tool was aimed to teach learners new ideas instead of just repeatedly going over the same content. So then after that, we see an evolution and trajectory of AI-based tools being used in education in forms of intelligent tutorial systems, in forms of adaptive educational games, in form of adaptive learning system, which was the focus of my PhD, recommender systems, and now what we're seeing like generative conversational AI, like the language models ChatGPT. And that evolution and trajectory also happened in Africa. Obviously, it hasn't. Oh, sorry, good. There's an echo. Thanks, Maha. So obviously, like it hasn't been fully implemented in educational institutions like how we see with the learning management systems, like Moodle. But we see that there have been different researches that have been done in Africa to look into AI-based tools to be used in educational institutions, even like primary schools. But pandemic, I see then we saw a wave of these tools being used in form of chatbots. So now, because teachers couldn't like meet physically with students, so they use chatbots to interact, to communicate. And then also what we saw is that students now could get personalized feedback on different questions that they have. But now with this generative AI, with the language models, now we see African developers and designers trying to design chatbots or trying to come up with their own learning assistants. Good example is one in Tanzania that I know of is Silabu AI Tutor. Another one is the Kwame Legal Assistant that is in Ghana that helps the law students. And also the one that I think most people got attention of was the Kainene AI chatbot. But not only in educational institutions like primary schools or the ones that we are in universities, but also we see that they have come up research centers in Africa based on AI. We see deep learning in Daba and also African Institute for Mathematical Sciences and Women in Machine Learning. Now, why I gave that a little bit of background is that to see already there has been some potential. There's been the use of these tools in some universities, in some of the primary schools and even secondary schools. And what so far literature has shown is that teachers and students have used this to interact, to ask questions, and also to get personalized feedback. It has also helped in terms of tracking the progress of students over time through learning analytics, so teachers and even administration can make well-formed data-driven decisions. So there's a potential of providing personalized learning, adaptive learning. And what we mean by adaptive learning, just to put it in a simple English, is the systems that give personalized content, learning content to students based on their knowledge level and based on their skills level. And so something, and also in addition to that I want to highlight is that another potential or opportunity that I'm seeing with most African developers and designers in educational sector is that now they are using chatbots, they're using generative conversational AI to have them to come up with more affordable solutions, right? To come up with something that it can be easily accessible to most people in an African context. Having said that, having highlighted the potential, having highlighted the opportunities, despite of all that, there has been challenges. And that is what we have been seeing, the discussions that are going on with the general public, especially in an African context. And there are many, many challenges that I want to acknowledge, but due to time, I just want to mainly speak on 4 key concerns and risks today. The first one is the mastery of student skills. Especially with the age that we're in of AI, the generative AI, the ChatGPT, we have seen our students using these tools uncritically. What I mean by uncritically, we see students just simply going to ChatGPT, whatever that they get is copying and paste and deliver it to you as their answers. But they don't critically think to see if it is true, if it is a fact or not. And that is something that most of us were discussing to see like, these tools might hinder or impede or even make our students not think critically. So critically thinking skills might be affected, but also the problem-solving skills and also creativity and empathy skills, which are quite important in this digital age that we're in. Another concern that I see that is quite important to highlight, which is connected with the skills, is the role of the teacher. My experience with speaking to different experts during my PhD research is that what the designers and developers missed, or something that was quite hard for them to design with these tools, is that they missed the role of the teacher. They forgot that education is a complex social environment, right, that involves both the teachers and students. It is not only the students, but you also have to consider the teachers. So the theme of this conference, which is empowering learners in the age of AI, if we want to empower students, I think we also have to empower the teachers with digital competencies or different understanding on the tools that are out there that are being now integrated into the education. And due to all this misunderstanding, due to the missing the role of the teacher in this age of AI being integrated in education, what now we are seeing is the negative attitude. People not trusting these AI tools. And that's another concern that I see that is a challenge on integration of these tools in education, is the untrustworthiness of artificial intelligence due to the negative attitudes, especially from teachers, but also due to the cultural design issues that I know that my colleagues will discuss in this panel, but also the bias that exists in the data that they're training on builds up all this untrustworthiness of artificial intelligence. Lastly, I'll conclude with something that I'm seeing is rising up, which for me, I see as a risk and concern, and that is the commercialization of these AI-enabled tools. Initially, they were free, but now we see even, for instance, the more evolved ChatGPT, which is ChatGPT 4, for you to access, you have to pay $20. Duolingo, which is partnering up with ChatGPT, for that type, for you to use it, you have to pay $20. Now, for the global north, that might not be anything, but in the African context, for you to monthly be paying $20, that's already something that somebody might be saying, why should I invest? And they won't access these tools if we continue to commercialize these types of tools. And my worry is that when we see the widening gap of digital divide, when we see digital inequity being widened up, that's something that we can discuss today. But it's a worry that I see that might come up. It's a worry that I see that we should really think about it as African developers and designers to try to see, especially if we are trying to, trying to target the goal, the sustainability development goal, the sustainable development goal number 4, which is quality education for all. So yeah, there's opportunities, but also there's some implications, challenges that we need to address.
Interesting. And I think you really highlight very important things you gave very good examples of AI systems developing in Africa. And I think the audience is really happy to hear about these developments and to know that there has been already some work done. But also the aspect you highlighted about the costs and how this can actually lead to digital inequities, because if at all access actually you require money to access this technology. Okay, are we getting more? Are we just increasing the gap between the global north and the global south? So that's something very important, and I think we can somehow get back to this aspect. And I think the aspect you talked about, role of the teacher and the human AI kind of hybrid, these aspects need to be brought into consideration. And then the AI literacy, are the students actually aware of how this is done? And I mean, maybe other panelists will also highlight it, but also you talked about the design of AI systems. So the question is, in Africa, the question is the data actually used in training these systems? Is it based on African data? Because possibly if that's the case, then it's easier to actually reduce on the kind of bias that is carried with kind of systems based on data from other contexts and then using the systems in other contexts. All right. We'll get back to this, and for other panelists, feel free to touch on this, but I'll welcome Maha to introduce herself and also get into the discussion of the kind of cultural challenges related to AI in education that could need special attention. Maha, can you unmute, please?
All right. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm a professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. I have a PhD in education, but my undergraduate degree was in computer science, and my thesis project at the very end of my degree was using neural networks. So I understand how machine learning works very well. And then I stopped doing programming for 20 years because I was working on education and supporting people in my institution with technology and non-technology ways of teaching. And so when ChatGPT came out, it was something like, okay, now we need to talk about AI. But I also teach a course on digital literacies, and I've been teaching it for a while. So we've been talking about AI in general. Before ChatGPT, there was a lot of AI, as Tumaini was saying, and we know that a lot of the AI we've had before has been biased, right? It's been racist, it's been sexist, it's been ableist. Facial recognition AI is worse at detecting Black faces. And then when you use it in something like proctoring of exams, it's more likely to not see the face of someone with darker skin. It's likely to be assuming neuronormativity. So if someone is neurodivergent, like they have autism or ADHD, it's more likely to think they're cheating just because they're behaving differently than the norm. And so it's ableist in that way. And a lot of times sexist as well. So we know that AI has been like that. So there's no reason at all for anyone to assume that ChatGPT is going to be different or any of the text generator tools are going to be different. So a group of us who have been working on metaphors that we use for AI have been very careful about the kinds of metaphors we use and what kind of implications they have. So we've come up with colonizing loudspeaker, because basically what it does, it takes a lot of knowledge that's from the colonizing part of the world and then synthesizes it and gives it back to us as if it's neutral. And it isn't, right? If we use calculator as a metaphor for ChatGPT, we're assuming it's a neutral tool that produces technical information, but it's so much more than that. It's producing ideas, it's producing text. The image production AI tends to also produce images with a certain way of thinking. So those are ways in which we already know it's not politically neutral, it's not culturally neutral. And always, and I think, Rogers was just saying this, and we all know this, like, what data is it trained on? And also, what's it doing with the data? Because what it does with the data that is probably from white Western male content, because that's what the majority of the internet has. But what it does with it is synthesizes it and reproduces it in some other form and never tells it where it came from. So it has no accountability for where it got it from. And it gives no credit to the originators of these ideas. And so what happens when our learners use things that come out of AI is they have no way of tracking where it came from, what kind of worldview it's coming from, in order to sort of see it in context. They're just getting the information and using it right away. And that's in itself problematic. Now, we could always say, then maybe the solution to that is, okay, let's train AI with more diverse data. We choose what data it gets. And of course, it would be nice. And there are already ways that you can train your own AI, but will that be available to everybody in the world in the way ChatGPT is? That's the question. Will the big companies that do this do that? But the other thing is, in order to get that kind of data that doesn't currently exist very easily, are there any labor that's going to be used and abused and exploited in the process? And things like thinking about some indigenous data in like North America is not meant to be shared in those ways. And so what kinds of people's rights are we stepping over if we try to do that? And also there is so much knowledge that exists in oral forms and visual forms that aren't in the way these kinds of AIs get trained. So what kind of data is just invisible to this AI, even if we try to train it on more diverse data? This data doesn't exist a lot of places. And even if we put it in, how much is it compared to the other data, right? And how does that take over? And we know, for example, as an example of like Wikipedia, a lot of people think about AI like Wikipedia, and we know that Wikipedia is supposed to be democratic because anyone can edit it. But then again, the majority of people who edit it and the people who have editor roles or are able to remove content are mostly white males. And historically, that has created a biased English Wikipedia, which has very different stories than the Arabic Wikipedia. And I bet if those of you who speak more languages will see the differences and the kinds of biases they reproduce. And we'll come back to language in a second. So other than the epistemic injustice of just where the data is coming from, there's also the perspective it's coming from. So because it's coming from that kind of space, it has these particular views that it's reproducing. And one of the things that they did, and I'm sure a lot of people know about this, but the company OpenAI contracted a company called Sama in Kenya to make sure that the data that ChatGPT didn't produce offensive content, and same with DALL-E, right? Offensive or violent content. But in the process of doing that, those Kenyan workers had to have a lot of mental health challenges because of all the awful content they saw. So that was a human exploitation. And then the company OpenAI did nothing to support them after that. So in the process of even trying to create an ethical AI, they did a lot of unethical things. And so what are we doing about that as well? So the bias is being reproduced, and how we try to get rid of it and how we try to avoid it, what kind of human costs are there in that? I do want to say that the translation issue is huge. So the use of languages other than English, there's two issues. Non-native speakers of English using English, spaces like ChatGPT kind of sort of normalize them to native speaker, certain tone of native speaker English. And I think for learners in my university, for example, who are non-native speakers, it makes them think that that's the only way to write. That's the only good way to write, rather than that it's okay to have your own English that is still grammatically correct, but, writes in a slightly different way. And I'm worried about learners starting to use this early on in their lives and then never developing their own voice and feeling like there's only one way to write English. And also, we also know that the AI detectors, which, very bad idea to use them anyway, because they're so bad, so inconsistent. But also, I heard there was research that AI detectors are more likely to think that non-native speaker human writing is AI. So even the detectors have that bias, right? And then when you come to translation issues, we know that translation in general, which uses AI, has been for a long time, automatic translation, is better between certain languages and not others, and in one direction and not the other sometimes. And I've seen the kinds of mistakes it makes with Arabic and English, and they can be pretty bad. They can really mess something up completely and miss the context. And what's happening right now with Zoom, you can have automatic translation. And I've heard about big issues that have happened when students misunderstand something the professor has said. And the issue is we need administrators and policymakers to have better AI literacy and better digital literacies, so that when things like that happen, they know how to respond. That the better these tools get, we know they're not, and we know that AI produces things that are fake and fabricated and hallucinating. But the better it gets, the less skeptical we are going to be of its output, and that's problematic. I'm so worried about it getting 99% good, because that 1% is what can cause a huge problem for us. And if we let that go, we're going to be in huge trouble. So I do want to add to something Tumaini already said. I think one of the issues with a lot of us in the global South is a lot of our approaches to education take from the Western world. And we have this issue of education of rural areas where maybe you don't have enough teachers. And so I think a lot of people will come and say, oh, well, let's use AI for that because we can't reach the students and it's going to be personalized. And I know Elizabeth is going to talk about this a little bit more, but I do want to, emphasize what Tumaini said in terms of that teaching is not just about cognitive and passing on knowledge. It's also about this empathetic human connection. And the thing is, even if we get textbooks from the West, when there's a teacher there, they can adapt to the culture. I don't know yet that the AI is doing that very well. I think we can train AI to do that. There are people who are working on creating ethical AI and feminist AI, but so far the research in my part of in Egypt with, I have an Access to Knowledge for Development Center. They're doing a lot of work on feminist AI. And every time they try to experiment with something coming from the West, they're like, nope, it needs so much intervention from a local teacher who themselves don't have the digital literacies to train the AI. So they need to do a lot of work on their side. And so I think it's very important not to use it like a magic bullet, and to use it very carefully. And then to think about, how are we in Africa and how are we in the global South going to take ownership over how we want AI to be in the future and create it in a way that not only definitely for our audiences, but also how do we bring that back to the world so that the world sees less biased data. I think doing it for ourselves is probably very manageable within resources that we have, with maybe not all countries will have those resources. But the issue of bringing it back to the North and back to the Western world so that they listen to our perspective on the world, this is something that I'm very concerned about, and like whether it will happen at all. Thank you.
Very interesting. I mean, you talk about epistemic injustice and digital literacy and examples about facial recognition, and I think that's something very important and things we need to think about. I think we are reading about the current regulation for EU on AI, and we're talking about like trying to stop people from using, for example, biometric kind of data to actually make models and decide on things. And I think that's partly the reason, because the accuracy of this kind of models, the kind of how to capture this information, it's so in turn, it raises privacy issues. But also, as you see, the technology is being used if they're from the West, and you can't recognize, for example, dark faces, and you can actually end up with wrong kind of conclusion. That's really where the risk is. And maybe I'll hear from you when we're concluding whether you think we should just leave it. I mean, what do we do then? I mean, if we can't, what do we do? Are we able to actually design our own systems that just work within our own context? And is it even possible to train with enough data? As you said, it's already challenging. So these are very all important aspects, I think, to think about. So moving a little bit slightly to teaching and learning, I think we have talked much about the landscape and all the cultural considerations, but maybe I'll invite Elizabeth to go a little bit into like how AI support can support educators or teachers in delivering maybe personalized learning or all different kind of aspects, and whether there are any strategies that can be addressed or employed to address the teacher-student dynamics, especially in large classrooms. So you come from a more institutional level. So is there any potential? Can we actually apply this at a scale and have it used to improve learning purposes?
Well, I must first of all say I completely agree with Maha. A lot of the things you said, it feels like you've read one of my papers and brought the ideas forward. I feel very strongly about all the aspects of the limitation of AI, deep issues with digital proctoring. And I strongly believe that we need to decolonize AI. And that's a difficult process. I do, and you can call me opinionated, but I disagree that we have to have a proliferation of AIs. The reality is that we have massive pre-trained data sets, for instance, ChatGPT, or working with Meta's Llama, and we have to use that. But we have to find ways to decolonize it, and you've mentioned that as well, making it more apparent, the sort of prejudice that is inherent in it. I don't believe that you can actually remove it, because the vast bulk of data that it's trained on over the last few centuries are Eurocentric, are white, are male-centric. So I don't believe that's something you can really get rid of. There has been some comments about the digital divide in terms of AI as well. And I think we must think about it very carefully. First of all, in terms of this being a revolution with AI, if we look at every other technological revolution that we have had, there has been an unequal distribution where the companies, the governments have had better tools, better access. This is the first time that I have access to exactly the same tool that the President of the United States of America has in terms of AI. You can argue that they're adapting things as well, but in terms of, and yes, I do pay for my ChatGPT, in terms of that, I have the same level of access, or can have it depending on what I pay for. And that does make it different. What I would argue, though, is that what is available for free and what I'm paying for will be free within the next 2 months. What is available for free is very useful for our students as well. And using AI in the classroom is extremely important. But we need to reconceptualize a number of things. Okay, so first of all, if we look at a learning taxonomy, Bloom's, Krathwohl, Bloom's Plus, Solar, it doesn't matter. It starts off with remembering the data at the bottom of the pyramid and it moves up towards creativity. Now, authors such as Rivers and Holland this year suggested what we have to do when we work with AI is actually flip that upside down. You start with the creativity, the idea that you put into the AI. You go and look at the data and critically engage with it, compare it with other data. And eventually, when you've got through the whole process, you get to the remembering. So our entire pedagogy needs to shift. We cannot make AI fit the pedagogy we have now. It will not work. And frankly, we're wasting our time in the process. The other shift that we need to make is our idea of what is skills and what is knowledge, what is ethical and what is unethical. We cannot speak of plagiarism anymore. If you look at Sarah Elaine Eaton, in 2021, before the proliferation of AI, she spoke about a concept called post-plagiarism. And that has got 6 different tenets. But the most important is that we have to accept that hybrid human AI writing will become the norm. It is just so much quicker for me to do certain things using the AI, down to motivating to why I should have a different laptop. Many of the tasks which are repetitive, I can hand over to that. I'm still responsible for the output, and I can focus on the more creative aspects. Things that really require my attention, conceptualization. But while we can relinquish some of the work to AI, we cannot relinquish the responsibility for what is produced. So it's not okay to uncritically use AI. So what does this mean in education? Sorry, I know I'm moving very quickly. Just an example. As a lecturer, if I'm using AI in Africa, I've produced a course on my learning management system. I can now go and say, listen, take this whole course and change it for someone who is more of a visual learner, and the AI will do it. I can, within a day, have another version of the course up there and the people can choose which course to use. The reason I say a day is because I would check everything that it's done. Okay, so that's a wonderful use of AI. However, I have a problem with the question. The question says, now I'm missing the question here. My apologies. The question is, how can AI support educators in delivering personalized and effective learning experiences in Africa? The problem is the question, because educators shouldn't be delivering anything. AI has given us the opportunity to put agency and learning back in the hands of the students. They can now get their test results back, put it into ChatGPT, for instance, and say, why did I only get 3 out of 5 for this? How can I get a full 5 out of 5? How do I change my writing? Can you create a case study for me to practice with? It's capable of summarizing vast amounts of data. It's capable of removing jargon, giving you lists of definitions. You can ask it to explain the theory of relativity using the example of skateboarding. Obviously, it can help with your written English, and yes, it is colonial in the way that we think about writing and academic writing. And Maha, I think you may have a point there, but truth is, it does help to at least write in a manner that journals expect, even though that is a very colonial approach as well. It is brilliant for helping with coding. Data analysis is exceptional. But what we should really be doing is mirroring and supporting our students in using AI well. We ourselves have to use it, and we have to help them to use it better. And I want to give an example. I know I've spoken a lot now, but just one example, if you keep with me. We actually had a second-year pharmacology lecturer have his second-year class do a project on stereochemistry, which I know nothing about. But he said to the students, it is your task to use AI as much as possible in this project. And I want you to reflect on it afterwards. And the students did exactly that. And as much as I detest AI detection tools, which by the way do not work, so do not waste your time, but if you were to use it, the Turnitin score for the class was about 15%, even though they were told to use it extensively. And the reason for that is that the students engaged extensively with the input from the AI. So the students said, well, we're not really familiar. We want to use it because it helps us get a broader idea. It's got the potential to make things easier. And the benefits were specifically in data analysis and writing assistance, grammar checking, looking at the broader perspective. But that the students themselves said, ethically, it's about transparency, copywriting, and how you use the AI tool. And they had concerns themselves about validity and broad feedback. And the students, and remember this is second year students, 19-year-olds, said, well, we want a course on AI literacy because we're going to use this in our work one day. So I have spoken about quite a bit. The long and the short of it is AI is there. They will be used by our students. We can either ignore it or we can have a process where we make it part of the graduate attributes and the skills they take into the work environment. Yes, and it really is about agency. It is about shifting some of the role of the lecturer back into the hands of the student. Thank you.
Interesting. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I think your highlight of decolonizing AI, I think that's a very important thing. And your critical take on the aspects of where do we need teachers to support, to provide the personalized teaching, or we actually take advantage of the agency that comes with AI tools to actually manage the process. So these are very this is very insights, and also your highlight on what is free, what is already out there could actually be enough. Yes, there could be costs, of course, if you want advanced stuff, but actually already the tools that are there, possibly they could be helpful in driving or supporting teaching one way or the other. We'll get into more discussion of, I mean, we have 19 minutes to end, so we'll request the next speakers to be to move a little bit faster, so because we will request every speaker to give final thoughts about their aspects. But we'll go to Katleho. I would like you to like tell us or discuss a little bit on the ethical considerations that must be taken into account when implementing AI in African education. I mean, the previous speakers have highlighted a few aspects and the possibilities of ethical and privacy issues here, but are there any kind of ethical considerations that you think should be taken into consideration? And how do you address these concerns in line with data privacy and algorithmic bias that come with the implementation of AI? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and as well to the previous speakers who have really put the context of Africa into display and the challenges that are there in Africa in regards to AI in education and different aspects of life. Now, when considering the ethics when it comes to AI, it's quite multifaceted. There are many layers and many levels of ethical considerations that we really need to, ponder on and also critique. And one of them, just on a global AI ethics landscape, is that it is mostly based on universalism, which is embedded in Western ethics. And that implies that the type of ethics that is within the global landscape of AI is embedded in Western ethics. And the universalism in this is quite problematic because it ignores the many indigenous philosophies that are there in the world. There isn't any one ethic or ethics, and there's no such thing as universal ethics, because ethics reside within a context. And then in a context, communities develop their own ethical philosophies and ethical stances, and that should be taken into consideration when we talk about AI ethics. Is that we need to have an AI ethics landscape that is inclusive of all the different perspectives when it comes to AI. But then also, if we really can't have a universal ethics or a universal AI ethics, then it means that we need to narrow down AI within a particular context. So how AI is in America or Europe, it's not the same when it is in Africa, because you really need to take the African context into consideration. So what normally happens is that there becomes this blanket approach when it comes to AI, that it will, the ethical considerations are the same for everyone, which is not the case. All countries, all communities, all cultures, traditions, and so forth have different experiences when it comes to AI. And now in taking the context into consideration, we also need to look at the structural level that are in African countries. For an example, the socio-economic inequalities that also the previous speakers have touched on. Now, in the South African context, for an example, there is a divide in terms of education, be it in the basic education as well as in the higher education. Now, there are schools and universities that are better resourced than other schools. And that also tells you the kind of inequality gap that is within the different schools and universities as well. And then that also means that some schools and universities have better ICT infrastructure than other schools and universities. Now, that in itself as well poses challenges when we talk about the African context. Now, some institutions, educational institutions, don't even have ICT structures in them. So now, even before you can talk about AI, we also really need to talk about the basic level of ICT infrastructure within many of the African schools and universities. Now, with this in mind, it also means that there's also a difference when it comes to students and learners, is that those who receive better education than those who do not, it poses a challenge with them in terms of their learning and their approaches to learning as well. Now, with the digital divide, with those who have digital devices and internet access and those who do not, now it poses a challenge even when it comes to the integration of ICT within schools and universities. We have noticed this during the time of COVID, is that it exacerbated the challenges that are there within schools and universities. Many students don't have digital devices. Some don't have internet access. Some are in areas or live in areas whereby there's no ICT infrastructures in those areas. And those challenges in themselves tells us that there are those who are in progress when it comes to ICT and technology within schools and universities, and there are those who are also left behind and are trying to play catch up when it comes to technology integration within schools and universities. But then also on a basic level, for instance, in South African basic education, there are still a lot of learners who are having a difficulty in reading and comprehension. And that in itself is a major problem when it comes to education. If you have learners who cannot read and understand what they are reading, now what does it mean then when you integrate ICT or even AI into schools with those basic challenges? How do we come about having solutions in regards to that? Now, the context needs to be taken very seriously when considering AI, especially in African education. Now, if AI needs to be embedded in the context of Africa, then the issue of culture and language also comes to play. Also what the previous speakers have mentioned before. Now, we need to understand that African language, there isn't an adequate corpus of African language within the digital spaces. And there are languages that are used often, especially in the digital spaces such as English. But then when it comes to African indigenous languages, there's quite a challenge when it comes to that. And also for AI to grasp, African languages, because many of the AI tools that we have cannot adequately translate African languages. And then if you can't translate African languages, then it also means it's going to have difficulties in regards to understanding the different African cultures and traditions that are within Africa. So also we need to take into consideration, the history, the historical background of Africa from throughout colonization and so forth. Now, with that being said, what is the image of Africa within the digital spaces? What is the image of Africa within the world? Because historically, Africa has been regarded as a dark continent. Africa has been regarded as a place that doesn't even have people. So Africa there's a lot of bias, discrimination, suppression when it comes to Africa and African people. Now, if you have AI that is trained on the very same data, it poses a challenge and it reproduces the algorithmic bias that is there in AI. So in order for AI to work in African education, the rich history of Africa and its diversity needs to be taken into account. And then also, Elizabeth was talking about, the call for a decolonial AI, which means that we need to have an AI that is trained on the knowledge that is produced from the communities. Because if we're really going to take, issues of data privacy and algorithmic bias in education, we need to have, data privacy that takes cultural sensitivities into consideration. And also, there needs to be a clear communication when we talk about data usage. And also another thing that I would also like to add, because I see I have my time is almost up, is that I would also like to commend a number of initiatives such as the Masakane NLP, which is a grassroots organization to promote African languages by Africans and for Africans in supporting emerging technologies. And then also, there needs to be a collaboration with local communities. So AI shouldn't be from a top-down approach, but it really needs to come from the bottom up. So we need to have collaboration with local communities And the scholarship that needs to take this up also needs to take into consideration the African indigenous knowledge systems that are there in order to have data that speaks, really to an African context, that takes our languages and our cultures into consideration. And then I think that will also assist in combating algorithmic bias. But then
Right.
also in order for all of this to happen.
Sorry, Katleho, I think we have 5 minutes. So I think I really appreciate your insights, and I think we can continue the discussion. We have 5 minutes, and I would like to, we have the last speaker, that's Victor. So Victor, I think you give a kind of an overall conclusion of the discussion and highlight on aspects of like preparing for the future. Like we have had all these discussions. What next then? What do we do? What skills and knowledge should African students have? Any strategies aimed at learning education?
Okay, thank you, the moderator. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, time is fast spent, and I'll just say for me, we've dealt too much on challenges, and I think there are several opportunities. And if you will be sincere, most of us will use this AI. In fact, what we're talking about here, most of the things we're talking about today is generative AI. That's one that's giving us concern. And I will, to be sincere, almost every one of us here will use it to make us more productive. And our learners are also using it extensively. So I think we don't need to just dwell too much on challenges. We should see that this is an opportunity. This is, the way I see it is, understand what is learning. The learning, what is learning itself. So the problem we have is that we have attached too much of the process of learning to the end result of learning. And in every field in life, when you want to disrupt a field, it's about changing the process and still getting the same result, even better results. So I think what AI is going to do is that it's going to change, it's disrupting the process of learning, and so that we can get a better result. And so the learners on their own will use the tools, but the issue we have is in Africa, we don't have resources. So we call our languages low resource. So we don't even have a lot of electronic resources that are taking into consideration our context and our culture and everything. So what do? Instead of kind of seeing the weakness of AI, what we should do is that our government and the work community should invest in how to create resources. The West will not create resources for us in our local languages. They are not going to bring our context into documents they are creating. So we need to write the stories, we need to create content, create resources that these AI models will train on and be able to reduce the bias we already have. No amount of discussion will change, because the data this AI machine are feeding on is still the data that are being created and are still there online. And most of this data come from where? Come from the West. So we need to work on creating data, and we should not just kind of discourage AI. I feel like we should even encourage it. And more importantly, like somebody said, the literacy is what we focus on. Train our people to understand the limitations so that whatever they get from AI, especially from the generative AI, they don't just take it like hook, line, and sinker. They know how to query. So the level of critical thinking needed in education today is different from what we have been doing before. So now the focus is more on not just absorb information or whatever you see, now be able to critique it and verify and validate whether those things make sense. So I don't want to, I think we have 3 minutes more. I would like to stop here. I'll just say it's an opportunity, is actually solving a lot of problems, making a lot of people productive. But what you need to do is that as Africa, we need to work on creating resources, electronic resources that can help these machines to take into consideration our context and also our culture. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Victor. I mean, this has been a really great panel. We have really had discussions on aspects ranging from ethics, the introduction or the history of AI, including Africa and the current state and possibilities of trying to design systems with cultural aspects in consideration. So I think it's been a lot. Personally, I've learned a lot from this panel and all the discussions. And as Victor said, I think it's very we should not just look at what are the challenges. I think the opportunities are many, and I think there's so many things we can actually leverage on and see, okay, how do we take advantage of the existing systems within the limits that are available. and also being critical on the different aspects. We've talked about like the decolonizing aspects and all these processes. I think these are all very important aspects. So I want to thank our panelists again, Tumaini, Maha, Victor, Katleho, Elizabeth, and Paul, who has been assisting as a co-moderator. This has been really interesting, and I encourage the discussion to continue in Hoover. So you can have questions and discussions, they're continuing there because it is kept there. And I think this is a good start. We can continue and have more discussions about the AI on the African continent. Thank you.